Juncker, for coming along and speaking to the most Eurocritical group in the Parliament. Thank you indeed for coming along this evening. We're very, very grateful for that. We really are. And I also want to say that over the course of the last few weeks, a lot of things have been written and said about you. We're told that you like a drink and you're a smoker, and I even read that you drink endless cups of black coffee. We couldn't care less. We're not interested. We've even seen...
Do you have a cigarette, please?
Well, actually, it's funny you should say that. We're not interested in any of that. We've even seen some unpleasant personal family things written about events of 70 years ago, and, you know, none of us are going to go there. We're not interested in sinking to the gutter. We're not interested in behaving with the worst excesses of the tabloid press. But we are genuinely interested to hear what you have to say about your vision for the course of the next 5 years. And when you've spoken, there will be a lot of people here. Nearly all of these members are brand new to the European Parliament. One or two have been here before, but most haven't. And a lot of them would like to ask questions. And there is, I have to say, among many of us, a slight curiosity about this whole process. Because certainly in the United Kingdom, we had absolutely no idea that the European elections had any connection at all with who the next Commission President was going to be. And we also, I suppose, have a few questions about the fact that the Parliament only ever gets presented with one candidate to vote for, which doesn't strike us as being wildly democratic. And we're even more upset, and I'm sure perhaps you'll share this with us, that when we do get the chance to say yes or no to you next week, it'll be conducted by secret ballot, which strikes us really as being very strange indeed. But my job is this evening to be in the chair, and so I'm going to do my best to be entirely neutral. How about that? And if you believe that, you'll believe... No, really, I am, because everybody else would ask the questions. So, welcome to our group, and the floor is yours.
Chair, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to be here. You have come to this room in a very great number because you wanted to admire a real European arch-federalist. that's like they are looking like, and you wanted to see someone who is trying to bring the European nations down. You are admiring someone who doesn't believe in national member states, and you will be disappointed because years ago and again I was the one, we were only few to say this, who is expressing his view that European nations have to be respected, that nations are not a temporary invention by history, but that they are there forever, and the real aim, the objective of the European Union is of course not to destroy nations, regions, member states, but I have the highest respect for the national entities, because these national entities are not only entities but real long-standing projects of people living together on a given territory. So my intention is not to be helpful in the birth of the United States of Europe, because I don't believe in the United States of Europe. I've never used that expression. Yes, I did it in my pre-pubertarian time. But since I was seeing the first signs of maturity, that's going back to the age of 14, I never employed that impression. And so I don't think that on rhetorics we will have major difficulties amongst us. I wouldn't like to comment too much on the process, because I do know that you didn't and don't and will not like the process, but the process is that some of the political families in Europe decided to enter this electoral campaign with so-called lead candidates. I was one of them, but I know that the British public didn't take care about that, and so I didn't campaign in Britain for the one and single reason that I don't have a sister or a brother party in Britain. Maybe that this will change tonight, that I will make new friends and new allies. And rightly so, you pointed out that this will be a vote by secret ballot, which of course is to your advantage, because no one will be discovering that you will vote in my favour. And that's what I'm expecting. I would like to address a certain number of content elements which are important to my view. J'avais présenté.
I had, at the beginning of the election campaign, put forward a number of priorities. I put forward a number of priorities, and I described as the first priority the need that there was and that there still is to allow Europe to find growth again, to restore growth, a growth that would be rich in jobs. I never felt that we could spend money that we didn't have. I don't believe that growth will return if we just rely on budgetary deficits, if we just rely on mountains of public debt. You can't get rid of the deficit by getting into new debt. So we shouldn't spend money we don't have. We do have to apply a certain number of policies. Policies that we've already thought out, and I think we have to try to complete the single market, and we have to launch a single digital market, as I was saying, complete the single market that hasn't been finished yet. So if we do manage to launch this single digital market, if we do manage to complete the building of the single market, then we would contribute to the European economy an added value of 500 billion over the next few years, and we would witness the creation, not the spontaneous organisation, but the organised creation of millions of jobs. So we shouldn't be spending money we don't have. We should be carrying out programmes in order to give its a real meaning to a single digital market.
In Europe, to build a real European energy union, we have to lower the dependence towards Russia and other providers. We have to better interconnect the energy channels and the energy supply mechanisms we do have in Europe. We have to put our strength together when we have to negotiate with the provider countries, and we have to make sure that if the energy is no longer coming from the east to the west, that the west will be able to reverse the energy and the gas flux into the direction of the eastern and central part of Europe. I do think that we have a not less strong need to bring Europe back on the investment avenue. Investment is falling dramatically, and the private investment and the public investments have reached really low levels, and we have to increase the investment side of our common undertakings. This has to be done, according to my view, by mobilizing the instruments the European Investment Bank still has in between its hands, and by inventing, if necessary, new financial and financing instrument. I will have later this week a meeting with the President of the European Investment Bank in order to try to put together all the elements which to some extent are all on the table, but we have to assemble them in order to have a full-fledged concept which will have to be applied. I want a fair Europe for everyone. I do think that the social dimension of the European Union, of the internal market, of the economic and monetary union are underdeveloped, and I would like the European Union to become more ambitious when it comes to social objectives, and I'm ready to propose these. I am not very much in favour of prolonging, as far as the monetary union is concerned, the instrument of the Troika, because this instrument, although it has some merits, is lacking democracy, and we have to change this in the next coming years. I don't think that we will have accession of new members in the course of the next 5 years. There is not one single candidate country being ready to join the European Union in the next 5 years. We have to keep in life the European perspective for the Western Balkans, because this is necessary in this tragic and complicated region of our continent. We have to pursue and to continue the negotiations which are underway, but I don't think that this can and should be brought to an end. We have to deal with the problems of migration and immigration, both legal and illegal migration, because this is a problem which is not only hitting countries more openly exposed to this phenomena like Malta, like Cyprus, like Italy, like Greece, like parts of France. This is a problem for all of us, and we have to deal under the form of European answer to be given to this problem with this phenomena. I would like to say a few words on Britain, because I made it perfectly clear during the campaign, but you didn't follow the campaign. So I have to be more expansive on this point. One of my 5 priorities, mainly priority number 5, was to try to have a fair deal with Britain. I do want Britain staying as a constructive and active member of the European Union. This point of view is not shared by everyone in this room, but it's my view, because I have a great admiration not for the tabloid press of Britain but for the British people, because the continental Europeans have to remember themselves that this continent wouldn't be free if Britain had not done in the past what the British, with the highest courage possible, were doing in the interest of all the other European nations. So I'm admiring Britain for what Britain did, and I'm like Britain and the British, all the British, for their common sense, for their pragmatic approach when it comes to deal with all kinds of problems. I want a fair deal with Britain, because we have to respect not only the British nation but also the domestic decision-making process. There are decisions which have been taken by the House, and we have to respect that. And we have to take into account British specifics. And the day the British authorities, the British government, will present a list of requests to the European partners, we have to take them under meditation, and we have to negotiate. I'm not against the principle that from time to time and on different domains, competencies can be repatriated from Brussels to the national parliaments, under the condition that Britain and others will not block the members of the euro area if they want to increase the internal coherence of the euro area. I think that this is about democracy. The British are saying something, we have to respond to that, they have to listen to us, we have to listen to them, and I would like to have a fair deal with Britain, because all of us, we need Britain, and my personal point of view and my institutional point of view is that Britain also has the need to be part of the European Union, but we have elements of disagreement. I can't hide at that. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take questions in batches, and I'll point to you and introduce yourself and introduce your party, ask your question, keep them short and sharp. But I'm going to begin by asking David Borelli, the co-president of the EFDD group, to ask the first question.
Grazie.
Thank you very much. First of all, as a co-chairman, I'd like to thank our guest for coming along today. Our group believes formally in the concept of direct democracy. That means that crucial decisions are taken directly by the grassroots, by the people. And with this end in mind, recently we have been gathering questions that ordinary citizens would like to have put to you. And so I have the honour of giving you 3 questions from the grassroots. The first is, what do you think about direct democracy, and would you be ready to support this and encourage it? Second question, what do you think about the European Investment Fund, and secondly, what do you think? Are you going to try to ensure that innovation and investment to help SMEs are actually now taken out of the calculation of the 3% deficit at the GDP level? We know negotiations are underway about taking out that sort of innovation expenditure from the calculation of the deficit, but we think your presence here is very useful so that we can get your opinion on that point. Thank you.
Mille grazie.
Thank you very much. I believe that the questions related to direct democracy have to be dealt with really and resolved at the national level. I don't see how we can, at the European level, within the European Union, or start organising referendum throughout all member states on the same day on the same issue, because it could well be that some people would say yes, some people would say no, or it could well be, for example, that the smaller countries, the bigger countries around them, would then have less ability to actually make their voices heard compared to others. So I'm not very much in favour of having referendums carried out in all member states. But of course, nation states are free to organise them if they want to. I organised a referendum in Luxembourg because I wanted to do on the constitutional treaty, having looked at what had happened in France and in the Netherlands, where there was a rejection of the constitutional treaty in referendums there. A few weeks later, organised a referendum in Luxembourg on the constitutional treaty, and it was the second referendum within 80 years in Luxembourg. We're not used to having a direct expression of citizens' will in this way through referendums, but I won that referendum in particular because I'd announced that I would resign if the Luxembourg people didn't say yes, because if there's some sort of political consequence or political sanction for the result of a referendum, then there's no point having a referendum. There's no point consulting them. If the people come out against a project of a government, or if the people come out against a project of a parliamentary majority, if they say no, then they're also saying no to those who've actually asked the question, to those who've put forward the proposal. So I say yes to national referenda, but I say no to European level referendums because there isn't such a thing as a European people. There isn't such a thing as a European people.
And that's the reason why you can't ask me to organise popular referenda in Europe, because the European people and the European public opinion doesn't exist. So I'm in favour of normal democratic behaviours on the national level and not on the level of the European Union. En ce qui concerne
as regards the redemption fund, so the resolution fund, the European Resolution Fund, well, that's not a topical issue at the moment, but in the context of the Economic and Monetary Union, various people put forward the idea of a European Resolution Fund. We'd had to examine that before we introduce this sort of mechanism. Other sort of conditions would have to be met first. There'd have to be increased budgetary discipline when it comes to fiscal harmonisation, for example, when it comes to increased coordination of the economic policies of member states of the monetary union, and then so that's all for the resolution fund. And this third question from your vice chair, I am a champion of applying the Stability and Growth Pact as it exists, and that also includes using the flexibility clause, which is part of the SGP since the reforms that were made in March 2005. I'm in favour of budgetary rigour, but I'm against excessive austerity, which gives rise to a lot of injustice, which in particular hits hardest the most vulnerable in our societies. I have for a long time asked the question as to what sort of public expenditure could be withdrawn from the calculation of the deficit, withdrawn from the direct application of the Stability and Growth Pact. As I said, that there's room for manoeuvre for flexibility within the Stability and Growth Pact. I'm going to try to get funds flowing again from the banking sector to SMEs and to the real economy. I'm working with the European Investment Bank, for example, on projects of this time to get the funds flowing again. But if you go outside the GSP, if you take one segment of public expenditure outside the Growth and Stability Pact, how would you deal with other questions, people asking for the same thing in other areas? When in 2005 we reformed the Pact, there were some people who wanted to take out of the Pact investment expenditure, but then you'd have to agree, first of all, on the precise definition of investment expenditure. Then there were others who, like me, who suggested that whether it would be possible to withdraw from the application of the Pact financial volumes for development cooperation or military or military expenditure, and some people felt that military expenditure shouldn't be covered by the domain of the Stability and Growth Pact. So it's a bad good idea or a good bad idea. I think you've got to find other ways of finding flexibility apart from not applying the SGP.
Thank you. I think on the point about referendums, albeit as a neutral chair, one of the...
Why are you so insisting on that?
Well, I'm just playing, really. I think one of the points is that one of the reasons for the growth of Eurosceptic parties and movements is that it's all well and good for people such as yourself to say that they fully respect the right of nation-states to hold referendums. The problem is that the institutions of the European Union haven't actually been very good at respecting the results of them. Denmark voted no, made to vote again. Ireland twice voted no, made to vote again. And in the case of France and the Netherlands, they voted no and were just completely ignored. And the Constitution was rebranded as the Lisbon Treaty. So I think this is one of the great areas of contention. And I know that you'd said you'd resign if you lost the referendum in Luxembourg. I did speak at the Vote No meeting in Luxembourg, and I thought we did quite well, given the resources we had. We still got 44% of the vote. So
I got 56%
I
of the vote.
I know.
And nevertheless, the treaty didn't enter into force.
No. Well, anyway, we won't have that debate. But if we discussed what the differences in powers between the Constitution and the treaty were, we wouldn't be here that long, really, would we? Right, now, who wants to ask a question?
Aye.
Right. OK. Fine. We will do these in batches of 3.
Well, thank you, Chairman. Mr Juncker, I was very struck by the fact...
Would you say who you are?
I'm sorry.
Where you're from?
Roger Helmer, a British UKIP member of the European Parliament, and I've been a member of this House for 15 years. Thank you for coming. I was struck by your concern about growth and jobs, which I suspect we all share, and your concern about falling investment, which I suspect we all share. But I ask you to consider, is it not the case that the cause of lack of growth, of extensive unemployment, especially in southern Europe, of lack of investment, is the direct result of European policies? The euro currency has been an economic disaster and has spread desolation and unemployment across southern Europe. Excessive employment regulation has made small companies unwilling to hire and is depressing employment and growth and adding to costs. But above all, energy prices, our wholly irrational energy policy, has given us energy prices in Europe that are forcing energy-intensive businesses offshore, taking their business, their jobs, their industry and their investment with them. What we need to do, if we want the grass to grow, is to get the rocks off the lawn.
Roger, thank you. We're going to have, we want to have one from Fabio at the back there.
Buonasera, Presidente.
Good evening, President. Youth unemployment in particular has reached unacceptable highs on our continent. About 59% in Italy, 45% in Spain, and in Croatia and Cyprus around 40%. Such a social tragedy has serious consequences for young people. The increased number of suicides. A 2014 study shows that in Italy in 2013 there was a 67% increase in suicide, people committing suicide for economic reasons. 85% of these people were either unemployed or company owners. So we'd like to know what measures you're going to take in the Commission in order to stem the rise in youth unemployment, and are you going to ensure that there's a minimum income for all the populations of the 28 member states to put an end to this dreadful situation of social desolation, social massacre?
Round, hands up, Peter.
I'm Peter Lundgren, representing the Sweden Democrats. And first of all, I want to say, in what way, Mr Juncker, do you differ from an EU federalist if indeed you're not an EU federalist, as British media and other media reported this morning after comments made by you in the European Parliament yesterday? And let me give you some experience from my first week here. My first experience here in the Parliament were not really good. My first meeting as coordinator for the TRAN committee, it was very strange. I received before the meeting an email with the following words: kindly bring your voting cards. But there were no voting at all. The decisions were already made. I would say that democracy that day went straight out the door. So was this a mistake, or is here a fake democracy? Because you have to agree with me that this is not the definition of democracy. And let me be clear with you, Mr Juncker. We are not against Europe, a beautiful continent where we can work together, but with our own sovereignty, our own flag, etc. But we are anti-European Union with all these building and circus and senior jobs and functions like yours. So my last point, I want to ask you, if you can make us an offer, or can you tell us, what are you going to do for the EFDD group here in the European Parliament?
Great stuff.
Oui, enfin, je vais tout faire pour que la...
I shall do everything possible to ensure there are a few of you next time around. That's what I'll do for your group. You're complaining about behaviour within groups and the European Parliament not being democratic enough. So you'll have some work ahead of you to improve the democratic quality of your work and that of the Parliament. Why do I distance myself from the arch-federalists, as they're dubbed in Britain? Well, ask those federalists. They often say I attach too much importance to nations, and they say I go on too much about subsidiarity. What I say is what the states, the national governments do best should be done at that level, and the same applies at every level of government, including Europe. Everything that's going on anywhere in Europe doesn't have to be dealt with Europe-wide. Family policy, for example, I think should remain within the sphere of national sovereignty. I wouldn't want the sort of European Union poking its nose into every aspect of every European's life. I'm not the sort of person who wants to gather as many powers as possible centrally here in Brussels. I keep hearing people saying this. I mean, in Britain, you talk about federalists, you assume that means someone who wants to centralise power. But what I understand by federalist is someone who wants to decentralise. Who wants to decentralise powers that are not best vested in the centre, put them down to lower levels if they can be wielded more effectively there. So that we can set up a virtual circle with the job being done at the most appropriate level. So that's what I mean by federalist. Now, I'm in a club. I have to express all my interests. I'm not a multi-millionaire. I don't hold masses of shares. I'm not a major shareholder in multinational corporations. So I was just checking whether I wasn't a member of the Federalist Youth. Some research has been done on that. I'd be rather surprised. In other words, then, I'm not someone who wants to strengthen the centre in a blind, foolish way to the detriment of the member states. If power is concentrated, it would be in areas where individual member states are not able to act effectively in the wider international arena. We need to act together. It's not a decision that will be taken in isolation. A comment off mic from the floor. In partial reply to Mr. Helmer, if anyone thinks jobs and growth would have been worse without the single currency, well, let me tell you, I was Finance Minister and Prime Minister for a total of 20 years. I kept having to come to Brussels weekend after weekend for financial and monetary meetings. I was there when the European monetary system came in. I was there when it was a privilege, if we call it that, when Britain left the monetary system, and had the privilege of seeing competitive devaluations which made life more difficult for workers in countries whose governments had poorly managed their internal affairs. And let me tell you this, if you look at events in Iraq and Ukraine, and the worst economic and financial crisis that Europe's been hit by, if we hadn't had the euro, we'd be having a monetary war underway now. France against Germany, against Spain, against Italy. I've seen that sort of thing in the past. Look, you put a question to me, I'm giving you my reply.
Easily become exciting. It seems to be a process which is underway. Donc, je suis.
So, I'm someone who takes the view that without the discipline the euro has imposed on us, the situation would be worse. That's not the same as saying that every policy we may have applied in the past was necessarily fully driven by common sense and would have taken us that far. I'm in favour of the principle of ensuring that in all the member states there is a minimum wage, as I take the view that all labour deserves remuneration, and anyone who is working ought to be able to live on the wage or salary that he or she earns. So I'm in favour of also of a minimum guaranteed income level in all the member states. That's what I did in Luxembourg. I would be glad to see the whole of Europe doing it, but we're not going to be able to take a legislative initiative to force EU member states to do that, because that is clearly very much an issue within the national purview. I beg to differ from you. I agree to a certain extent with you. At least have that to my credit.
You're right. The word federalist is completely the wrong word. It's hopelessly out of date. It's not federalism that those of us on this side of the argument object to. It is unitary, centralised government that we're objecting to. So I think, it is a completely misused word and hopelessly out of date in the context of this European debate. Right, who's up next? OK, one over there. Yes, William.
Thank you. Mr Juncker, first of all, thank you for visiting us.
Say who you are, please.
Sorry, William Dartmouth, MEP for the UK Independence Party. Do you still consider free movement of people within the European Union as fundamental, even though there are now very large differences of national income between countries in the EU?
Thank you. And who is up? Right. Yes, OK, thanks. Yeah, go on.
Ok, vorrei chiederle...
Good evening. Julia Moore is my name. I'm from the Five Star Movement. I'd like to put it to you that Europe has great farming and food resources and great biodiversity. According to a number of news items that have come in from the US, they're calling for this diversity in Europe not to involve denominations of origin, which protects the small and medium-sized companies that produce these goods in Europe. According to certain more recent European rules, furthermore, we've seen a position where the seeds for various crops are being standardized on a huge scale, and that may lead to GMO seed being used. So can you protect that special characteristic of Europe?
Thank you. And
Jonathan Arnott. I'm from the UK Independence Party, a newly elected MEP. At the European elections in the United Kingdom, over half of the vote went to Eurosceptics, at least by the standards of this place, or to withdrawalists, such as the UK Independence Party, which won those elections. You say you don't have a sister party in the UK. but the Four Freedoms Party, which had UK EPP on the ballot paper, got just 0.17% of the vote. So my question is about Spitzenkandidaten. It doesn't work because, as you yourself said earlier in this meeting, there is no such thing as a European people. Fewer than 1 in 500 British voters supported you, and what we got was a situation where Schulz gets a second term as President of the European Parliament, and it's agreed amongst the biggest groups in the Parliament that you get the President of the Commission. And I ask you to can you understand how that will be viewed, how that will be perceived by the British people, and that will surely push Britain closer to the exit door?
Do you agree that a majority built by the two main parliamentary groups in the European Parliament is a majority? But I'm grateful for your information, because till now I don't know if all the members of the two largest parliamentary groups in the European Parliament will vote into my favour. That's the reason why I'm coming here, because I need support, and that's the reason why I'm here. When I was saying that the European people doesn't exist, I wanted to say about that the European people doesn't exist in the sense of national people do exist for centuries. It's something different, like the European Union is something different. I'm a lawyer. When the lawyers don't know how to call a beast, they are saying that this is a sui generis thing. The European Union is a sui generis identity, but doesn't have a European people in the sense we are qualifying national people. So that's the reason why I'm described by many so-called federalists in Europe as someone who doesn't really understand what is going on in Europe. There are many things I don't understand, but I would like to give you the feeling that it is necessary on this complicated continent to bring national sovereignty parts together, where nations in a stand-alone can no longer make sure that their sovereignty will lead to any beneficent result. As far as biodiversity, en ce qui concerne Madame la...
Turning to your question, Madam, on biodiversity, I believe you're referring to the ongoing negotiations between the United States and the European Union on the free trade agreement. May I say, first of all, that I'm in favour of that agreement, since I feel it will be to the advantage of the peoples of the US and Europe. But within those negotiations, we cannot act as if we were prepared to do absolutely anything in order to complete that free trade agreement. We cannot give up our position on health protection. I don't think we can offer up our social provision as part of these negotiations. Data protection provisions can't be part of the deal either. Everyone trading in Europe must respect European rules, regardless of where the headquarters of the organisation may be found. In other words, European rules must be respected, certainly in the instance of the agri-food industry, which plays a huge role in Europe, which our partners on the other side of the Atlantic cannot afford to overlook. I'm very unhappy regarding the rules currently being applied to GMOs. If you look at 1507, for example, if the Council doesn't come out with a majority to oppose, the Commission has to decide what to do. If we don't proceed, we could be challenged in the court. There are certain situations which arise in democracy which make me feel somewhat awkward, and I'm wondering whether we can't get the Parliament and the Council involved in the decisions on this. If European citizens end up with a decision that doesn't reflect the shared views of the member states, we'd be in an awkward position that I wouldn't want to see becoming the norm. On the free movement of workers, we regard that as a fundamental right. This is something that goes right back to the Treaty of Rome. I don't believe that everyone moving around the European labour market are parasites or criminals trying to abuse the welfare systems that they find wherever they go. There's only 2.5% of people moving at all, whereas in the United States, Canada, Australia, there's far more labour mobility than in Europe. So we're really talking about a marginal issue. There are instances of abuse, and those have to be tackled. I'm in favour of free movement of workers. I certainly don't want to facilitate the actions of people who might wish to abuse the citizens, but it's up to the member states to adopt in their national legislation, administrative practices and police guidelines to make sure that abuses do not occur. Apart from that, I have to say I'm struck by the way this debate has developed in recent years. Ever since I've been in the Council, I'm a veteran, a dinosaur, aren't I? I've been part of the scene in Europe for decades. I've been Prime Minister, Minister of Finance. I've always heard our British colleagues arguing for enlargement. That when it hadn't come about, they wanted enlargement because it was felt that would prevent deepening. But once the enlargement has taken place, they're saying, well, actually, no, we don't want the poor members to be able to move around. I can't accept that sort of approach in Europe, so I remain of the view that the member states have to deal with these issues. There's no reason to move away from the European principle of free movement, but the actual practices governing the rules are national.
Cameron has been a great proponent of enlargement of the European Union, a very keen advocate of that, and you're right. One of the consequences that goes with that has been an increasing flow of workers from all parts of Europe to Britain and to other northern European countries. But I think quite clear in what you said to us just now that this has been here since the Treaty of Rome and this is not up for negotiation.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you. Right.
But I would like to draw your attention to the second part of my sentence, that it's up to national member states to take care of the fight against abuse. That's what I did in my country, so it's possible.
Yeah, no. I absolutely understand that. Absolutely understand that. But the big, broad issue, it could not be clearer. Yes. Please, no, behind you, sir. Rosa. Rosa, right.
Okay. Buonasera, sono Rosa D'Amato del Movimento.
Rosa D'Amato from the Five Star Movement. Cohesion policy is my question, particularly macroeconomic conditionality thereof. This principle says that funds may be suspended in cases when a member state doesn't meet economic governance rules. The adverse effects are significant and there'll be less fairness in cohesion policy. Regions will then bear the consequences of macroeconomic conditionality, even if they're not principally responsible for macroeconomic governance, and the suspension of those funds may have a negative effect on the poorest regions of the member states, disproportionately so, and they're particularly reliant on this funding. They'll have less reliability in terms of financing, so the Commission can threaten suspension of the funds, and they have the last last say. They're supposed to have a structured dialogue, and Parliament is only consulted. I think there's a big disbalance between North and South of Europe. Don't you think that implementing this policy will simply aggravate that existing deficit or gap? So we'll be infringing Article 3 of the treaty, which says the EU should promote economic and regional balance and solidarity between member states. Parliament's the only democratically elected body, and so this group is meant to be about direct democracy, and we can't support our institution not having any decision-making powers in this structured dialogue, particularly with regard to the consequences on the regions and citizens we represent.
Newly elected MEP. Has David Cameron discussed with you, if you become a President of the Commission, which competences would he like to see repatriated? And would that treaty require the support of the 27 countries?
We'll take one more in this particular round. Yes, please.
Laura Gea, Movimento 5
Stelle. Gemma, Five Star Movement. More than once you've touched on the topic of austerity rather than the Troika itself. What do you think about the policies implemented by the Troika in the most crisis-stricken countries, which has seen a marginalisation above all of the European Parliament in the preparatory phase and in the monitoring of ongoing developments? Also, what about the social impact that these policies have had? This sort of austerity was meant to get jobs and social cohesion and growth back on track, but the results have been a further loss of jobs, around 2 million over the course of 4 years, and higher rates of unemployment amongst the young in particular, and we feel we have to represent them here. Thank you.
Oui. Tout d'abord,
yes, first of all, the lady who asked me the question about Mr Cameron. In life, I can do a lot of things, but I don't see myself as Mr Cameron's spokesman. So if you want to hear what he said to me, you should ask him. I'm not his spokesperson, and if I was applying for that job, I'm pretty convinced he would turn me down. We've spoken, albeit briefly, on a Sunday evening when we were both in a good mood, which meant we could avoid the subject which probably would have provoked the most bad temper. As far as the Troika is concerned, this is a programme-style speech that the President cannot embark on with you, really. I'd say there's a prehistory to the prehistory of the Troika. Some countries parted from common sense and they failed to abide by their responsibility to other generations. They acted to the detriment of future generations. They ran up debts and deficit and they didn't manage their countries properly. On top of that, there was the sudden shock of the economic and financial crisis, the international crisis, which still further worsened the problems of those member states. In terms of the Eurozone, well, you would say if we didn't have a Eurozone, we wouldn't have had the problem, but we would have had other problems. In the Eurozone, we were trying to repair a flying aircraft as it flew in flames, and really we had to improvise ways of fighting the crisis at every turn, tools that we didn't have at the time. The Commission has no experience in terms of structural adjustment programmes, since the Commission has never had to run such a programme. The International Monetary Fund had that expertise, and so in part we turned to the IMF for assistance in that work. I'm the sort of person, having chaired the Eurogroup, who saw this adjustment and the action by the Troika and some of its component parts with a degree of growing pessimism, because on numerous occasions I noted that their forecasts, on the basis of which the adjustment programmes were founded, were inaccurate, and every time we started up an adjustment programme we had to have a B programme which allowed us to correct our aim if the macroeconomic conditions failed to follow our initial forecasts when the programme was established. I would say that I think there won't be adjustment programmes over the next 2 or 3 years, but if there were to be one, before establishing an adjustment programme, I think we would need to have an impact study on the societal impact of such an adjustment programme in order not to proceed blind. That said, there was no alternative. There was no other option. The countries we're talking about and others running that risk had market access cut away from them. They couldn't obtain financing anymore. They were on the brink of the abyss, and therefore we had to put in place solidarity mechanisms with a quid pro quo. We needed to see solidarity from those countries which were seeking assistance. Macro conditionality is a term that many Europeans will fail to understand, I think, but we go on using these terms, which not everyone can understand. Anyway, macroeconomic conditionality is relatively recent. Beneficiary countries under the structural and cohesion policy programmes have to meet a number of criteria. They can't, on the one hand, ask Europe to simplify things too much, to take one person's money and give it to someone else, without them having to follow a number of sound management principles. If we did that, Europe would be criticised for failing to oversee proper use of taxpayers' money, and we're often criticised because Europe's resources aren't always allocated in the best way, and often it's because member states misallocate EU money. I've always been in favour over the years of a change of co-financing rules, because if you demand of a country which is economically weaker and dealing with serious social consequences to co-finance 50% of the programme, it's an insult to that country. Over the course of the years, we've seen an increase up to a level of 95% of co-financing.
We will let you go, I promise.
Oh, sorry, we get this. Sorry. In the unlikely event that it's David Coburn, I'm the MEP for UKIP for Scotland. In the unlikely event that Scotland gets separation from England, will Scotland remain in the EU? And if, for example, it is not in the EU and it applies for membership, will it have to adopt the euro?
Thank you. Ignacio.
Okay, Ignacio Corrao, Movimento.
Ignacio Corrao, Five Star Movement. I would like to ask about the EPP, the Socialists and ALDE and their behaviour in terms of the allocation of committee chairs. They've really come out hard and frustrated this group's aims, and that really frustrates the votes of millions of citizens. If you think that conduct was anti-democratic, I'd like to hear you criticise the leaders of the EPP, Socialists and ALDE.
Okay. And we're going to take one more in this round. Christine. Yep.
Tack så mycket. Jag heter Kristina Winberg och är ny...
Kristina Winberg. I'm a new MEP. I'm from Sweden and I represent Sweden Democrats. Mr Juncker, then. Since I'm new here, I have to say, first of all, I was very disappointed by the way in which positions were allocated within parliamentary committees. As I was saying, I'm new, and I read Article 17.3 of the Lisbon Treaty, which talks about how positions should be allocated, and I wonder what the consequences will be for the future. Will we be deprived of speaking time, or of reports that we ought to get. I don't think this behaviour is acceptable. You've got 5 priorities. You talk about immigration. You say that we have to be resolute in coping with the problems posed by immigration. But how? Do you have a programme? Do you have a plan? As a member of the Libe Committee, I'm particularly interested in this. Have you got anything down there in the pipeline? You say that the EU has to help refugees in neighbouring countries more. What are you going to do? And then you say you don't think that the European Union will be enlarged in your presidency. Well, I'd be very happy. I'm happy to offer you a cigarette to celebrate after the meeting, if that's the case. I'll take your proposal on board. I'm sure it will be immediately implemented. As far as enlargement is concerned.
What about the rest?
I just wanted to pick up this question you raised, which is a fundamental one. In terms of the response, the commission I run, although I won't call it my commission, is not yet in place. That's why I can't give you a full answer. I'm waiting for the other 27 commissioners to be appointed, and then we can work on a programme. According to the treaty, the President is only entitled, in fact obliged, to give general outlines of action for the commission they will preside, and I'll do that next Tuesday in the European Parliament, because that's where the next Commission President will have to speak to the main elements of their programme. And next Tuesday I won't be able to embark on all the details with you, because simply to put in place immigration policy, legal and illegal immigration, external border protection and so on, it would take several hours alone to do that. So the commissioners who are responsible for this will have to speak before the Parliament for the policies for which they're responsible in detail. You've asked me a question about how Parliament organises its work. Well, I'm not sure what tradition you come from, but in my country the tradition is that the government deals with government business and the Parliament deals with Parliament business, and the courts deal with their own business and not other people's. I am a great believer in the separation of powers, and I don't have the will or ambition to enter into that debate when I'm not familiar with the details. I wasn't party to the arrangements to which you've alluded, but I certainly noted down your wish to play a full parliamentary role as incumbent on a member of this Assembly. But you'll have to put your points to the presidents of the other political groups. Can you hear me or not? I am hearing you, it comes the answer. Maybe I haven't been clear enough, but I just wanted to say I can't give you a proper answer because you're describing a process in which I've played no role.
We want your opinion about this.
Before expressing a view, it is an old tradition in my camp to be informed on what was happening. I can say it's a crime, it's a disaster, it's a wonder, I don't know what did happen. If I'm informed, I will perhaps let you know what I have. No, but I'm not involved in this business, but in fact I'm disinterested in this business. As far as Scotland is concerned, the colleague there, yes, okay, there too I have to say, as a matter of principle, that this is a question in the hands of the British people and of the Scottish people. It's up to the UK to deal with that question. I don't think that it would be wise nor intelligent to give foreign advice when it comes to a question which has to be dealt with in the framework of the constitutional order.
I didn't ask for foreign advice, sir. What I asked you for was an opinion as to whether Scotland, if it became independent from England, would still remain within the European Union. That's something that only you can answer. Mr Salmond, the First Minister of Scotland, spends all his time telling the Scots that they will remain within the European Union, but that doesn't seem to be the answer from Monsieur Barroso or various other people.
Do believe me that I did understand your question.
Also the question of the euro. If they were out, would they have to adopt the euro?
I wanted to make reference to the fact that this is a question to be dealt with by the British nation and not by the European Union. If Scotland takes... No, the second part of your question was if yes or no, in the event Scotland would decide in favour of independence, Scotland would be automatically a member of the European Union, and if not, should have to apply, and if applying, should have to take on board the euro. Mr Van Rompuy, a president well known to the chair, and Mr Barroso were perfectly clear on that. I don't have to change a word as far as their declarations are concerned.
Okay, last round, because I think we've had a... At the back, yes, thank you.
Salve, sono Dario Tamburrano.
Dario Tamburrano, Five Star Movement, ITRE Committee. Mr Juncker, future President of the Commission, in the Five Star Movement, we're enthusiasts for your wise choice to include energy as point number 2 in your programme. For us, that's one of the key challenges that Europe and the entire world will need to tackle as soon as possible. We're firmly convinced that only swift transition to a decentralised, low-coal, renewable energy system will help us deal with the lack of energy in the EU, which sadly hasn't adequate natural resources in terms of energy. The latest leaks we've heard about the climate and energy package 2030 indicate that the European Commission has a study concluding that a binding target of 40% for energy efficiency by 2030 would lead to a reduction of CO2 emissions and gas imports of a similar scale. But when it comes to renewable energy, it talks about a value of 27% as binding, but only for Europe as a whole, not for individual member states. So we are therefore wondering what direction in detail will go into your 2030 climate